I spent 10 years of my life trying to become a father, only to discover that when it finally happened. The baby wasn't mine. My name's Daniel. And this is how my wife tried to pass off another man's child as mine. And how I left her with absolutely nothing. I'm 37 now. My wife, well, ex-wife Sarah, is the same age. We were together for almost 15 years, married for 10 of those. Back when we were still dating, we were really big on having children. I had a lot of siblings growing up, most of them younger than me, and I've always been great with kids. Sarah also always pictured having a family with 3 or 4 children. It was something she dreamed about since she was young, so we were completely in sync on that front. Unfortunately, as you grow older, you realize that life doesn't always go the way you want it to. After we got married about 10 years ago, that quickly became clear. We had dated for around 5 years, so we never felt the need to take our time with anything after the wedding. We went straight to trying to conceive, but it just didn't work for us, which was devastating. When I say that we tried everything, I really mean everything. Even things that you normally know wouldn't work. But we were so desperate for a baby, so you really can't blame us for going all out. Well, here's a bit of a spoiler alert. It had been 10 years, and we didn't have a baby yet. That's actually a major part of why I'm recording this. As all couples struggling to conceive have experienced. There have been times when it looked like things had finally happened, only for that time of the month to show up some days late. There were about 2 instances where we actually got a positive pregnancy test, but about 2 months later in both cases, she miscarried. That was extremely painful for both of us to experience. I know I'm talking a lot about things that happened in the past, but it's important for you to understand how crucial it was for both of us to have a child. And before you ask, yes, we'd been to several doctors. I've had my swimmers tested more times than I'd like to admit. And yes, they passed with flying colors. Sarah also had many different medical tests done, and for the most part, the experts weren't able to determine why we couldn't conceive. We tried IVF as well, but that failed. We considered adoption and surrogacy, but we might be a bit too old-fashioned for that. Those options weren't off the table completely. They likely wouldn't expire for us anytime soon, so there really wasn't a rush until we figured out that we truly couldn't have a child on our own. It's important to understand how much pressure we faced from relatives who both come from rather traditional families, which is likely why we were so fixated on having kids. However, not being able to have children yet had backfired because in traditional families like ours, children are almost a necessity. Without them, it's like you've somehow failed at life. I blame very strong religious beliefs for that mindset. Sarah got most of the brunt from both sides of relatives, though I wasn't exempt myself. Male relatives especially liked to make comments about how they'd never seen a man from our family unable to put a baby in someone. Again, I've gone through all the tests a man can go through, and I really didn't think I could be convinced any further that there was nothing wrong with me. Anyway, let me get to the actual story. Sarah and I had a healthy sex life. It used to be because we were trying for a baby, but at a certain point it just became habit, even after we'd mostly accepted that it wasn't going to happen for us. Personally, I wanted to know that I tried my best to have a child of my own, so I wouldn't start to wonder whether I could have done more by the time I turned 80. Since we were intimate so frequently, there was really no reason for me to suspect anything unusual on the rare occasion that we thought she might be pregnant. This time around, she missed her period and we started to get excited. But of course, we had to temper that excitement because we'd gone a decade without any luck in the pregnancy department. Why would we put all our hopes on a missed period? However, after she missed her next period, Sarah decided to take a pregnancy test. And lo and behold, it was positive. Honestly, I was ecstatic. Sure, there was a bit of doubt and apprehension that she'd miscarry like the previous times, but that worry was much less than I thought it would be. I felt like being very positive about it would somehow help the chances of the pregnancy making it to term. Though of course, 9 months is a very long time. But I had hope. Very thankfully, the pregnancy actually got to the 5-month mark, and I genuinely don't think I've ever been happier in my entire life because we had never had a pregnancy last that long before. Honestly, I had been hopeful, but there was a part of me that never imagined I'd see a pregnancy get to that point. Sarah was so happy too, obviously. I was glad to see her like that because she really got the worst part of the scrutiny from relatives, and this was like a big middle finger to all of them. In fact, I noticed that Sarah's relatives were suddenly so much nicer to me than they ever were before. While it sucked that their kindness seemed to be locked behind us having a baby, I was glad to have it regardless. Now, This is the part where I first realized that something might be wrong. We were watching a local TV show one evening, and there was a plotline about a woman who cheated on her husband and got pregnant with her lover's baby. This was a show that we watched quite regularly, but I noticed something was off when Sarah suddenly said that she wanted to watch something else. She wasn't too pushy about it. When I asked why she wasn't interested anymore, she blamed it on the pregnancy. A lot changes when a woman is pregnant, so honestly, I wasn't too suspicious about it. I eventually switched to another program, and she seemed to settle down at that point. But for the rest of the night, she was acting odd. I noticed her shooting me glances every now and then. I didn't dwell on it too much at the time, but things became more evident a few days later. It was a weekend, and the exact same episode of that show came on as a rerun. Her reaction was very similar. She suddenly didn't feel like watching it anymore. That was when I realized that I might need to get to the bottom of things. I asked her if she was okay, and she said that she was, again citing the pregnancy as the reason for wanting to watch something else. That time around, I didn't notice any other odd behavior, though maybe I simply wasn't as observant. The day after, which was just a few days ago from when this all started, I spoke to one of my good friends about the whole situation. He was the one who made me see that it could potentially be a case of Sarah feeling uncomfortable with what had happened in the TV episode because that's what she was guilty of herself. Honestly, it sounded ridiculous to me at first, but the more he spoke, the more it started to make sense. The thing is, I didn't want to accept what he was saying because that would potentially mean that what was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life was about to turn into a case of betrayal and infidelity. And I really don't know if I could have dealt with that. I'll admit that part of me didn't even want to investigate further to find the answers, because I was afraid that what I might discover could devastate me. After waiting for so long for a child, I wasn't sure whether I could handle such a revelation, so that's what brought me to my first decision point. I tried my best to notice any other signs that something was off. Hopefully you guys might have a theory or two about why that specific episode of the show made Sarah so shifty. Maybe it had nothing to do with what happened in that episode. Maybe it really just was the pregnancy affecting her at the worst times. But my friend's words kept echoing in my head. And as the days passed, I found myself becoming more and more paranoid. Some of you are probably wondering why I didn't just ask her directly. After 10 years of marriage, shouldn't honesty be something we'd established? Well, I eventually did ask her straight up. And that's when everything started to unravel. I think the exact words that came out of my mouth were something like, "Why were things different this time? We didn't do anything different, so why did it work this time? I know the test said there was nothing wrong with me, but I've been overthinking whether the baby is mine." Needless to say, she flipped out. I started trying to calm her down because I was genuinely concerned about her fury affecting the baby. But obviously, I had just accused her of cheating on me and trying to pass off someone else's baby as mine. So even I can say her anger was justified. That I felt like complete crap every time I replayed how things went. It was very unpleasant. Eventually she calmed down, but she told me that I couldn't stay at home that day. Again, I felt like it was justified, and I thought that from her reaction, and how genuine it seemed to me, that I had actually messed up. It had to be my baby, right? At this point, I really hoped that I'd be able to get her to forgive me. But there was one thing that made me feel a bit uncertain. As I was grabbing a few things that I'd need to spend the night somewhere else, I heard Sarah on the phone talking to someone in hushed tones. The problem was, I didn't know who it was, and I couldn't hear a word. I just knew there was whispering going on. By the time I went back to the room she was in, she wasn't on the call anymore. That part made my paranoia kick in again, but I had just seen where that took me the last time. So I really tried to wash it out of my head and not think too much of it. This all happened 2 days after our initial argument. It was my second night out of the house, and I was still torn between feeling guilty for accusing my pregnant wife of cheating and the growing suspicion that something wasn't right. Some people suggested that her anger was simply good acting, and that maybe being kicked out of the house was a ploy for my pregnant wife to move her lover in for a few days. I didn't want to believe that, but the seed of doubt had been planted. I tried to be rational. She was my wife, after all. I should trust her to some degree, right? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't being paranoid for no reason. I'd had a cheating partner when I was much younger, and I knew that gaslighting comes easy to them, so after 4 days, I was finally allowed back home. There was an awkward period, but things got back to normal relatively quickly. Almost as soon as they did, I decided to use my brain this time and keep my emotions under wraps. I came up with a plan to look through her messages by borrowing her MacBook. I figured I'd be able to look at her social media and messages, and her laptop would give me more time to search than her phone would. One day, I managed to get her to hand over the laptop, apparently without any suspicion. The problem? I found nothing. There wasn't a single suspicious person in her messages. And trust me, I went deep through the messages of people who were unfamiliar to me. I checked her Facebook too, but I couldn't check her Instagram because it wasn't logged in on her computer. Honestly, there didn't seem to be anything amiss. The only thing of note was that she seemed to talk quite often with a guy called Ryan, but I dug through her messages and found nothing even remotely inappropriate. Was I overthinking things? Maybe everything was too clean? Maybe she got rid of anything inappropriate between her and this Ryan person? The thing was, I knew there was no way for me to prove my theory unless she slipped up. So for the time being, I decided to just keep observing. Part of me was really hoping to be proven wrong. I didn't know if I could take the heartbreak of being on the cusp of becoming a father and having that taken from me. I was scared of what I'd become if it happened. I desperately hoped it wouldn't. But the doubts kept eating away at me. The uncertainty of the entire situation was driving me mad. I'm the kind of person who, when feeling like there's even a 10% probability of something being a lie, starts to get paranoid and overanalyze until I can get a solid answer. At this point, once I had started to doubt that the child was mine, things began to spiral. I'd blame my friend who first suggested the scenario, but most people I spoke to agreed with his assessment. So I suppose I was just too blind to see it myself. After weeks of inner turmoil, I ended up talking with Sarah about the situation again. I knew it could potentially end horribly, so I started the entire conversation trying to paint my emotions in a way where she'd understand that I wasn't accusing her outright. I just needed reassurance. At this point, verbal reassurance wasn't enough for me. I needed conclusive evidence so I could go back to living my life normally. So I asked her to do a DNA test. Big, flipping mistake. We sat in the living room as I explained everything. To her credit, she quietly listened and didn't explode like the last time. Then I suggested that she'd go for a prenatal DNA test. I had done some reading and realized that we didn't even need to wait for the baby to be born. All it would take was a blood sample, and we could know for certain whether I was the father. She listened in absolute silence and didn't say a word until I asked, "What do you think?" Yeah. It didn't go well. She simply stood up without a word and went into our bedroom. From the sounds of things, I knew that she was packing clothes. A DNA test is probably never going to be an easy thing for a man to ask a woman to get. I don't know whether there's a trick to it, but I suppose a happy marriage might be shaken heavily by a paternity test request. I get it, but I wish she understood where I was coming from too. I simply needed to be reassured. It seemed like the only way to stop me from going crazy, because I was about to have my first child after waiting for so freaking long. And the sudden success had me so concerned that I know how stupid it sounds and how unfair it is to her. But that means that there was no way for me to get what I really wanted after so long without becoming suspicious. Maybe things just finally clicked and all the stars were aligned right. But I still needed the reassurance that I know it makes me an insecure guy. I've told myself that already. She eventually left the house. I tried to stop her, but she just wordlessly held a hand in my face, and I let her go. I felt so defeated because even an idiot could have told you that conversation wouldn't have ended well. But it was such an impulsive thing. I couldn't help myself. Anyway, she walked out on me and stopped picking up my phone calls. It was a week before I had any idea where she was. I finally managed to speak to her sister, with whom Sarah was staying, so I at least knew she was fine. Her entire family hated me now and spent every opportunity cursing me out. The part that hurt the most was that I was finally about to have a baby, and I had soured the entire experience. Then came the text message I had been dreading. She told me that she wanted a divorce. I didn't have the guts to reply immediately. I was in no rush to pursue that, and I doubted I was going to be served with papers anytime soon, at least not before the baby was born. That would be the last thing you'd want to waste money on with a baby on the way to. So yeah, if you were hoping for an update where I came out justified and validated, having realized she was cheating on me with her fitness instructor or something. This wasn't one of those stories. All I could really say was that the moral of the story seemed to be, think before you do rash things like I did. Or maybe try and find other means to find the truth. When I didn't see anything suspicious on her devices, maybe I should have known there was nothing to be found. But that wasn't the end of the story. Not even close. My wife and I remained separated until the baby was born. It was very bittersweet for me because I was so overjoyed to finally have my baby in my arms. But I knew that custody issues would soon become a problem because the divorce was eventually going to happen. I also hated the fact that I had always wanted to give my child an amazing, wholesome family, but things were going to be split from the very start. That part felt like absolute crap. However, there was a bit of a truce in the early stages, and I was able to come and see my daughter anytime that I wanted to, which I really appreciated. She was so beautiful, and I really think that there's nothing quite like the feeling of holding your first child in your arms. My wife and I never really discussed the situation with one another, but I sort of felt like it was hanging in the air. I guessed it was going to come up eventually when the euphoria of our child wore off. I think it was when our daughter was about to turn 1 that Sarah eventually served me with divorce papers. Honestly, it came out of nowhere. The topic had never come back up for discussion. It felt like she waited until a moment when I was feeling at peace and off guard before she hit me with that. And it was brutal. I don't know if I can express how much it hurts to know that you won't be in the life of a child that you desired so badly as much as you want to be. Imagine needing to fight over holidays and weekends and all that kind of crap. I was not looking forward to that at all, and I was imagining the effect that it was potentially going to have on my daughter at some point. But here's where things changed. I had taken a passive role in taking care of my daughter because simply setting foot in my sister-in-law's house where Sarah and my daughter were living always had me being treated like a serial killer. Everyone was always so hostile towards me and I felt like I deserved it. But it honestly was not easy for me to deal with it all. I still powered through all of that because I needed to see my girl, and that was what mattered to me more than anything else. Fortunately for me, there came a weekend where Sarah wanted to attend a wedding in a nearby city, and I volunteered to have my daughter stay with me for the day. Sarah fought against it pretty hard, but since her sister would be going to the same wedding, they knew it was convenient to keep her with me. I wasn't going to kidnap her or do anything rash, so they eventually gave in to my request. This was the first time I had been left alone for an extended period with my daughter. As I looked at her, all my overthinking came back to me. I thought of my stupid paranoia that got me and my daughter in this position in the first place, and then it suddenly clicked. I realized that I could get conclusive proof of whether the girl was my daughter or not. At this point, I fought in my head for about an hour about whether I should head to a clinic to get a paternity test done. But I realized in the end that it was the only way to put my worries to rest. I got in the car and headed straight to a clinic. When I got there, they made it clear that the results would be merely informational, they wouldn't be legally admissible. But that was fine by me. I was simply using the results to put my own head to rest. I showed ID, had a cheek swab done for both myself and my daughter, and when the process was over, I was told it would take about a week for me to get the results. My daughter eventually went back to her mother the next day when Sarah returned from the wedding. But honestly, that 1 week waiting for the results was absolutely brutal for me. I felt like I was going to lose my mind, and I called the clinic on 2 occasions before the week had passed to ask if the results were ready. I knew that this was the one thing that would finally put everything to bed. And if the paternity test was confirmed positive, I would know that I deserved everything I got for doubting my wife. In fact, I was ready to beg her to take me back. I wouldn't have had any pride at that point. Eventually, the results were ready, and I went to pick them up. It was negative. I wasn't the father. It's hard for me to express the way I felt holding that paper in my hands. I was awake, but it was like my body had stopped working. I couldn't react in any way. I was processing very complex emotions because, think of it like this, I realized that all the victimization that I had gone through was unjust. I was right all along. I had reasons to be suspicious, as weak as they might have seemed. But did the strength of my suspicion matter when I was right in the end? I had been gaslighted by a woman I loved and trusted for 15 years. My in-laws had treated me like a villain. I had played a sideline role in my daughter's first year of life, but that's when it hit me. This really wasn't just about my wife and me. The girl that I considered my daughter wasn't mine. I had lost myself in being proven right that it took a minute or two for the weight of the betrayal to hit me. I didn't have a daughter. The girl wasn't my daughter. I had wanted a child incredibly badly, and the child that I was overjoyed to have wasn't mine. Yes, I realized that if my wife was able to get pregnant with another man's baby, I might have been the problem all along. But even if I can't find the happiness I was looking for because of something out of my control, it doesn't mean that I deserve the pain of having the joy of my own child snatched from me through deception. I got home and I cried my eyes out. I drank to shut out the pain, and I don't think I've ever had as much to drink. It was terrible. I was a shut-in for about a week. I really don't know how to put into words the way I felt at that moment. I kept thinking very dark thoughts about my wife. I wanted all the negative emotions to be taken out on her. I don't think you can blame me after such a revelation. It was a lot to process. Anyway, let me skip the woe is me garbage. I contacted a divorce lawyer, which I hadn't done despite being served with papers for quite some time at that point. I was really dragging my feet on signing the papers, and it had almost been a month. But I decided to get serious now because vindication was the only thing I had left. As for the girl I had thought was my daughter, I really didn't know how to proceed. Should I remain in her life? I had fallen in love with her, and while many of you might say there's no point in raising another man's child, it really is easier said than done when you formed that bond. When it was time to get into the divorce proceedings, I already knew things weren't going to be easy. My wife and her lawyer must have thought they'd be presenting me as an insecure man who accused his wife of cheating multiple times without cause. But they had no idea that I had something up my sleeve. My lawyer submitted a petition to the court for a legal paternity test to be done, and I saw my wife freeze on hearing that. Her face will forever be frozen in my mind, and it made me incredibly happy to see that, especially when my lawyer gave a little hint that an informational test might have been done prior to lead to this request. The look my wife gave me was like she wanted to leap across the table and throttle me. All I could do in that moment was smile at her because I felt like I had won. To be honest, I was in the kind of situation where I couldn't truly win, but this was the best I could get. Seeing her know that I knew the truth, her lawyer tried to fight the request, but only so much. Because if you're so confident that you weren't sleeping around, there wouldn't be any reason to so vehemently fight a paternity test request. She gave her consent, and so did I. Eventually, our daughter was taken for a sample to be collected, and another sample was taken from me at an accredited facility. Needless to say, the results were the same. I wasn't the father. It hurt almost as much as the first time because I had secretly hoped that the test was going to show something different. She literally could not meet my eyes after that point. After everything, all the gaslighting, being made to feel like a crappy partner for accusing her of infidelity, I was clearly very right to be suspicious. The divorce filing was just a continuation of her gaslighting, probably to cover up her tracks. Well, it was going to come anyway with this revelation, so I guess the head start didn't hurt. There were more than enough text messages from me showing how she had nearly made me lose my mind, calling me crazy and insulting me for accusing her of being unfaithful. I had the texts from all of my in-laws too. I was turned into some kind of pariah, but now it was clear that I didn't deserve to go through all of that. The judgment at the end of everything, absolutely nothing for her. The judge was very sympathetic and said that if the child had been mine, he likely would have awarded at least child support. But I had no legal responsibility for the girl, and he couldn't do anything that would seem to potentially reward such deceptive behavior. I was tempted to let Sarah keep the car that she had, which was in my name, but I really couldn't do that. Not after everything she had put me through. She had family, they'd support her. But this was a woman who now had no house, no car to her name, nothing substantial in the form of finances, and a baby who wasn't mine. Things were suddenly a lot less cushy than they had been during our marriage. As for the girl I thought was my daughter, she was nearly 2 years old by the time everything concluded. It wasn't a decision I took lightly, but I had to let her go. It hurt like hell, and it still does, thinking of how I was betrayed into finally thinking that I had the child I desired so much, but I realized that her remaining in my life would be a constant reminder of that pain, even if I chose to adopt her as my own. I know there might be a lot of people who disagree with me doing this, but the child's real father is out there somewhere, and hopefully he'll step up to the plate. I've never figured out who she had the child with. I kind of assume it was the Ryan guy I saw her texting with, but I can never be sure, and I am eager to close that chapter of my life. Once the divorce was finalized, I made sure to send an image of the paternity test to every single person who knew my ex-wife closely, and I added a very tasteful text message for all of the in-laws who had come for my throat. Honestly, I'm glad that everything is over now. I don't feel like I really won, but I'm glad to come out on the other end of everything having proven myself right. I didn't have to live a life that was a lie, and perhaps I can find someone who will be a lot better for me in the end. Who knows, there is a certain satisfaction in knowing that my ex-wife will basically be starting her life from square one, but I think she deserves that. In fact, I think she's getting off mildly. I wish there was more justice for what she put me through, but there's a kid in the mix now. And as much as I want to detach from this situation entirely, I don't want an innocent child to get caught in the middle of things. A big thank you to everyone for listening to my story. I'm glad to be at the end of this journey, and all I can say is to always trust your gut when something seems off. It isn't really worth beating yourself up when you feel like you might be right. I'm glad I followed my instincts because I finally feel free now, and it's the first time I felt even a little bit good in a long time. After a year of emotional gymnastics and a decade of trying to become a father, I'm starting over. But at least I'm doing it with the truth on my side. If you've been through something similar or have thoughts about my story, I'd love to hear them in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories like mine. Sometimes the truth is more devastating than fiction, but it's always better to know than to live a lie.